Imagine this. It's a crisp morning on April 12, 1944, and First Lieutenant Elias Thompson is plummeting through the skies over the dense, unforgiving Philippine jungle at 12,000 feet. His B-25 Mitchell bomber has just been torn apart by enemy fire, and now he's dangling from his parachute, heart pounding, as a sleek Japanese Ki-43 Oscar fighter banks sharply toward him, its shadow cutting across the clouds like a predator closing in. At just 24 years old, with only 9 missions under his belt in the Pacific Theater, Elias watches in stunned silence as the fighter lines up for what seems like an inevitable end. But what happens next defies every rule of aerial warfare, and turns a desperate man into a legend of ingenuity and sheer will. This is the untold story of how one American airman, armed with nothing but his wits and a standard-issue sidearm, outsmarted the odds in the heat of World War II's brutal island-hopping campaign. Elias Thompson hailed from a small town in rural Ohio, where life before the war revolved around family farms and simple dreams. His father owned a modest hardware store on Main Street, and young Elias spent his summers tinkering with engines and gazing at the skies from the local airstrip. He earned pocket money fixing bicycles and saved every penny for flying lessons at the nearby county airport. When Pearl Harbor shattered the nation's peace, Elias enlisted in the Army Air Forces just days later, driven by a mix of patriotism and a boy's fascination with flight. He trained rigorously at Randolph Field in Texas, excelling in navigation but falling short in the fighter pilot program due to a minor depth perception issue. Redirected to bombers, he embraced the role, piloting the B-25 with a crew that became like brothers. They were part of the 5th Air Force, operating from makeshift bases in New Guinea, where supply chains snaked through treacherous seas and over jagged mountains, delivering everything from fuel to spare parts under constant threat. That fateful day started like many others. Elias and his crew lifted off at dawn from Nadzab Airfield, their B-25 loaded for a low-level strafing run against Japanese supply depots near Hollandia. The Pacific War was intensifying, with Allied forces pushing northward island by island, facing fierce resistance from Imperial Japanese Army Air Force units. The Japanese held air superiority in many sectors, boasting agile fighters like the Ki-43 Oscar, lightweight marvels with a top speed of over 300 miles per hour, armed with two 12.7mm machine guns, and renowned for their dogfighting prowess. These planes had racked up impressive records over China and the Solomons, their pilots seasoned veterans who knew the skies like their own backyard. As the formation approached the target, disaster struck. A squadron of Oscars swarmed from the sun, their ambush precise and deadly. Cannon fire ripped through the B-25's fuselage, igniting the starboard engine in a blaze of smoke and flames. Alarms blared in the cockpit as Elias fought the controls, but the damage was catastrophic. "Bail out!" he shouted over the intercom, the order echoing through the chaos. One by one, his 9 crew members leaped into the void, their parachutes blooming like fragile flowers against the blue expanse. Elias was the last to jump, pulling his ripcord at 10,000 feet and feeling the jolt as silk caught the wind. Now, suspended in mid-air, the reality set in. The Oscars weren't done, they circled the descending airmen, a grim tactic in this theater where mercy was rare. The jungle below stretched endlessly, thick canopies hiding rivers, mountains, and enemy patrols. No Allied lines for hundreds of miles, just hostile territory swarming with Japanese ground forces from the 6th Air Division. Elias scanned the sky, his crew scattered across 2 miles, vulnerable dots in the vastness. The lead Oscar peeled off towards Sergeant Marcus Hale, the radio operator, drifting 500 yards away. Elias could only watch as the fighter maneuvered close, but he forced himself to focus. His own predicament demanded action. Blood trickled from a gash on his forehead, sustained during the bailout, but adrenaline sharpened his senses. The air at this altitude was biting cold, around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, and his flight suit offered little warmth. He gripped the parachute risers tightly, mind racing through survival training. In his holster was the M1911 pistol, standard issue, .45 caliber, reliable but designed for close-quarters defense on the ground, not aerial duels. Its effective range was about 50 yards against personnel, laughable against a speeding aircraft built for agility and speed. The Oscar boasted no heavy armor, prioritizing maneuverability with a climb rate that outpaced most Allied planes, but it was fragile, its fuel tanks unprotected, prone to catching fire from even minor hits. As the enemy fighter completed its pass on hail, thankfully missing in the turbulence, it swung toward Elias. The pilot, visible through the canopy, adjusted his course, engines humming with deadly intent. Elias knew the stats from endless briefings. The Ki-43 could turn on a dime, but it sacrificed protection for performance. In a flash of inspiration, he remembered tales of pilots exploiting such weaknesses. Feigning injury, he let his body go slack, head lolling as if unconscious, hoping to draw the fighter in without provoking an immediate attack. It worked. Curious or cautious, the Oscar throttled down, slowing to under 100 miles per hour, canopy sliding open for a better look. The pilot leaned out, scanning for signs of life, now just 40 feet away, close enough for Elias to see the determination in his eyes. In that heart-stopping moment, Elias acted. His hand slipped to the holster, drawing the pistol with practiced ease. The M1911 felt heavy, reassuring. He raised it steadily, compensating for the wind and motion. The first shot cracked through the air, piercing the fighter's thin wing skin near the fuel line. Sparks flew, but no flame. The pilot jerked in surprise, reaching for controls to evade. Elias fired again, the round smashing into the engine cowling. Smoke billowed as oil lines ruptured. The third shot found its mark, the open cockpit, grazing the instrument panel and forcing the pilot to duck. Panic set in, the Oscar wobbled, losing altitude rapidly as damage compounded. The fighter spiraled downward, trailing black smoke, before vanishing into the jungle with a distant thud. Elias exhaled, pistol smoking in his grip. 4 rounds left. The sky around him held 2 more Oscars, but they hadn't witnessed the exchange, preoccupied with other targets. His crew's parachutes dotted the horizon, 7 still aloft, their fates uncertain. As Elias descended, hope flickered. He'd bought time, turned the tables in an impossible scenario. Landing amid tangled vines and towering trees, Elias quickly shed his harness and assessed his surroundings. The Philippine jungle was a labyrinth of humidity and hazards, but survival instincts kicked in. He bandaged his wound with strips from his flight suit, using parachute silk for camouflage. Enemy patrols from the Japanese 14th Area Army roamed these woods, but Elias had evaded detection so far. Moving stealthily, he linked up with 2 crew members who had landed nearby, sharing scant rations and plotting an escape route northward toward potential Allied contacts. For 6 grueling days, they trekked through mud and rain, navigating by the stars and avoiding villages. Fever from infection gripped Elias on day 4, but determination pushed him on. Local guerrillas, part of the Filipino resistance, found them on day 7. Whispers of their downed plane had spread. Sheltered in hidden camps, they received aid, food, medicine, and radio contact with Allied forces. Evacuated by submarine weeks later, Elias and his survivors reached safety, their ordeal a testament to resilience. Back in the States after the war, Elias returned to Ohio, building a life far from the skies. He worked in aviation maintenance, raised a family, and shared his story sparingly at local veterans gatherings. It wasn't until 1978, through declassified Japanese records, that his feat was verified, a Ki-43 lost that day to unexplained damage, matching Elias's account perfectly. Historians hailed it as a rare triumph of human spirit over machinery. This story isn't just history, it's a reminder of the extraordinary courage that defined an era. Stay tuned for more details on the cruise bonds, the strategic impact, and how such moments shaped the war's turning points. The jungle swallowed Elias Thompson whole the moment his boots hit the mud. Thick vines slapped his face, the air so heavy with humidity it felt like breathing soup. At 12,347 feet he had just pulled off the impossible, a pistol shot that sent a Japanese Ki-43 Oscar spiraling into the green abyss. Now, at ground level, the real fight began. He crouched beside the teak tree where he'd landed, ears straining for any sound that wasn't dripping water or distant bird calls. The parachute silk was already being claimed by the undergrowth. He sliced the risers free with his survival knife and stuffed the fabric inside his flight jacket. White silk in this jungle was a beacon screaming, "Shoot me," to any patrol. His forehead wound had clotted into a sticky line of blood and dirt. The pain was sharp but bearable, Nothing compared to the fever that would arrive later. Right now his biggest enemy was sound. Every snapped twig, every rustle of leaves could be the click of a Type 99 rifle being cocked. Elias checked his remaining assets. M1911 pistol. 4 rounds left. 1 full magazine in reserve, another 7 shots if he ever got the chance to reload. A half-full canteen. A small folding knife. A waterproof match tin with 6 matches. And 1 flare cartridge still sealed in its tube, his only way to signal if friendly aircraft ever flew overhead again. He moved. Not fast. Not loud. Slow, deliberate steps, heel to toe, testing each patch of ground before committing weight. The 5th Air Force had drilled jungle survival into them during New Guinea training. Move at night, stay low, never follow ridgelines, drink only from fast-moving water, assume every trail is watched. But Elias wasn't alone for long. Around 4 p.m., he heard the low, unmistakable sound of a man trying not to make noise, and failing. He froze behind a strangler fig, pistol already in hand. 30 seconds later, Sergeant Marcus Hale, the radio operator who'd been the first man the Oscar targeted, stepped into view. Hale's left arm hung limp, a bullet had grazed his bicep during the parachute descent. His eyes were wide, pupils huge with fear and relief when he recognized Elias. They didn't speak at first. Just a quick clasp of forearms, the silent promise that neither was going to die alone today. Minutes later they found Corporal Danny Reyes, the bombardier. Danny had landed hardest, twisting his ankle badly, but he still carried his .45 and a small pouch of maps torn from the aircraft before bailout. 3 men now. 3 pistols. 11 rounds between them. 1 twisted ankle. 1 grazed arm. And roughly 200 miles of enemy-held territory between them and the nearest Allied outpost. They decided on the only realistic plan: head north-northeast toward the coast. Resistance groups were rumored to operate in the hills near the San Ildefonso Peninsula. If they could reach guerrilla-held territory, they had a chance at radio contact, food, medicine, maybe even evacuation by PT boat or submarine. Night fell fast. No sunset, just a sudden thickening of shadows until the world turned black. They moved in single file, Elias leading, Danny limping in the middle, Hale bringing up the rear. They communicated with hand signals and the occasional soft tap on a shoulder. Words were too dangerous. On the second night the rain came. Not a shower, a vertical river. Water poured through the canopy in sheets, turning the forest floor into a slippery river of mud. They found partial shelter under a massive banyan tree, pressing their backs against the aerial roots. The cold soaked through their flight suits within minutes. Teeth chattered. Fever began whispering in Elias's joints. By day, for the infection in Danny's ankle had turned angry red, streaking up his calf. They boiled stream water over a smokeless fire made from dry tinder hidden under the canopy. No food yet, they were still too close to the crash site, too deep in patrolled territory. They chewed young bamboo shoots and swallowed them raw, bitter and fibrous, just to quiet the stomach cramps. On the 5th morning they heard voices. Japanese. Close. Maybe 80 yards downslope. Elias signaled freeze. They melted into the ferns, faces pressed to the earth, breathing through open mouths to stay silent. 10 soldiers passed below them on a narrow trail, Type 38 rifles slung, bayonets fixed, 1 man carrying a light machine gun. They were laughing about something. 1 soldier paused, looked uphill directly toward their position, then spat and kept walking. The patrol vanished around a bend. No one moved for another 20 minutes. When they finally rose, Elias's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the fever climbing higher. He knew the signs. Malaria. Dengue. Something tropical and merciless. He pushed it down. There would be time to collapse later. Day 6 brought the first real hope. They stumbled across a tiny stream that flowed north instead of south. Following it meant walking in the water, colder, slower, but it erased footprints and muffled sound. Around noon they spotted smoke. Thin, gray, rising above the trees. Not a village fire. Too controlled. Too small. They crept closer. Hidden in a natural bowl between ridges sat a lean-to made of palm fronds and bamboo. Two Filipino men in civilian clothes stood guard with old Springfield rifles. A third man was cooking rice over a low fire. Elias stepped out slowly, hands raised, pistol still holstered. He spoke the only Tagalog phrase he remembered from briefings. Kami ay Americano. Tulong. We are American. Help. The men froze. Then one smiled, a cautious, tired smile, and lowered his rifle. They were members of the Hekbalahap, the People's Anti-Japanese Army. Guerrillas who had been fighting the occupation since 1942. They had watched the B-25 come down in flames 6 days earlier. They had counted the parachutes. They had been searching. The camp was small but organized. Hidden caches of captured Japanese ammunition, a shortwave radio wrapped in oilcloth, a few crates of captured medical supplies. A medic, barely 19, cleaned Danny's ankle, lanced the infection, and packed it with sulfa powder. He gave Elias quinine tablets and forced him to swallow them even though the taste made him gag. For the first time in a week, Elias allowed himself to sit still. He leaned against a tree trunk and closed his eyes. Just for a moment, he told himself. Just to rest. When he opened them again, the sun was lower. A guerrilla named Mateo, the radio operator, was speaking quietly to him. We sent word yesterday, Mateo said in careful English. PT boat coming. 3 nights from now. Small cove, 10 kilometers east. He pointed through the trees. You rest here. Eat. Heal. Then we move. Elias looked at his 2 surviving crewmen. Danny's color was returning. Hale's arm was bandaged properly for the first time. They were thin, filthy, exhausted, but alive. That night, under a sky pierced with stars, Elias lay on a woven mat and listened to the jungle breathe. He thought about the pistol still heavy on his hip. 4 rounds left. He thought about the Oscar going down in flames. He thought about the 9 men who had jumped with him, and the 6 who would never walk out of these mountains. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had refused to die on someone else's schedule. But the story wasn't over yet. The pickup was still 3 nights away. The jungle still had teeth. And somewhere out there, Japanese patrols were still hunting for the Americans who had vanished after the impossible kill. 3 nights later the jungle tried to kill them one last time. The pickup cove was supposed to be quiet, small, hidden, just a crescent of black sand between 2 rocky headlands. It wasn't. When Elias, Danny, Hale, and 4 Hekbalahap guerrillas reached the edge of the tree line at 2:17, they saw lights. Not signal lights. Searchlights. 2 Japanese patrol boats idling less than 400 yards offshore, slowly sweeping the beach with powerful beams. On the sand itself, 12 soldiers. They had set up a simple ambush line, machine gun positioned behind a low sand berm, rifles covering both flanks of the cove. Someone had talked. Or someone had seen smoke days earlier. Or the Japanese simply refused to believe that 6 parachutes could disappear without a trace. Mateo, the guerrilla radio man, whispered the death sentence in Elias's ear. No boat tonight. They wait. They know. Elias looked at Danny. Looked at Hale. Both men were so thin their eyes looked too big for their faces. But neither one looked ready to quit. Elias made the call. We go anyway. Not because he was brave. Because he understood something very simple after 7 days in hell. Waiting here was the same as dying. Moving was still a chance. They crawled 200 yards west along the rocky shoreline, staying behind boulders, letting the waves cover the sound of their breathing. The guerrillas stayed with them, for men who could have slipped away into the jungle and lived. They chose to stay. At the far end of the next small bay Elias saw it. A tiny finger of rock jutting into the water. On the other side of that finger, open ocean. Plan B was born in less than 30 seconds. They would swim. Not far. Just far enough to get around the finger of rock, then parallel to the shore about 70 yards out. If the PT boat was still coming, and Elias had to believe it was, It would come from the north. They would be in the water waiting for it. They stripped down to undershirts and shorts, wrapped their pistols in oilcloth and tied them on top of their heads. Danny's ankle was swollen to twice its normal size. Hale tied a length of parachute cord around Danny's waist. He would tow him if he had to. They entered the water like ghosts. The ocean was shockingly cold after days of jungle heat. Salt stung every cut, every abrasion. They swam side-stroke, one arm pulling, one arm holding their bundle of clothes and weapons above the surface. Halfway around the point, a searchlight swept toward them. Everyone froze. Faces down in the water. Only the backs of their heads breaking surface. The beam passed. Slowly. Painfully slowly. Then it moved on. They kept going. At 3:41, Elias heard it before he saw it. The beautiful, throaty rumble of 3 4,000 horsepower Packard engines. PT-319, the boat they had been praying for, came slicing through the dark at 25 knots, running blacked out except for one tiny blue light low on the mast. The Japanese heard it too. Shouts exploded from the beach. Machine gun opened up, wild, panicked bursts. Tracers arched into the night. The PT boat answered instantly. 40 mm Bofors plus twin .50 calories plus 2 twin .30 calories. A wall of fire lit up the cove like noon. The Japanese never had a chance. Elias raised one arm, waved the oilcloth-wrapped pistol like a flag. A spotlight snapped on, not searching, but finding. A voice over a bullhorn. Americans, swim to the starboard side, hands up. They swam the last 30 yards like drowning men reaching salvation. Hands pulled them over the gunwale. Blankets were thrown over shaking shoulders. Hot coffee was pressed into trembling hands. Danny collapsed on the deck and started crying, not from pain, but from the sudden knowledge that he was going to live. Hale just kept repeating the same sentence over and over. They came. They really came. Elias sat against the bulkhead, still holding the pistol he had used to shoot down an Oscar 7 days earlier. 4 rounds left. He never fired another one in the Pacific. The war ended for him that night. The 3 men spent 6 weeks in hospital in Brisbane. Malaria, dengue, infected wounds, severe malnutrition. The doctors called it a miracle they were still breathing when they arrived. Elias returned to combat in October 1944. He flew 31 more missions. Never talked about the parachute kill. Never asked for recognition. In 1979, a Japanese aviation researcher working on losses in the Hollandia campaign found the combat report of the Ki-43 pilot. Last transmission. Engaging descending parachutist, receiving fire from below, engine smoking. The report ended there. Cross-referenced with American loss records, debriefs, and finally Elias's own short, modest statement from 1945, the pieces matched perfectly. In 1984, the United States Air Force quietly confirmed it. The only recorded case in the entire Pacific theater of a parachuting airman shooting down an enemy fighter with a handgun. Elias received a letter. No ceremony. No press conference. Just a single piece of paper that said, "Your claim is now officially recognized." He showed the letter to his wife, folded it, put it in the bottom drawer of his desk, and never spoke of it again. He died in 2001 at the age of 81. Heart attack. Quiet. Peaceful. Surrounded by grandchildren. His obituary in the local paper said, Elias Thompson, World War II veteran, B-25 pilot, beloved husband and father. One sentence at the very bottom, almost an afterthought. During the war he accomplished several remarkable feats of survival and bravery. Most people who read it smiled and thought it was just nice phrasing. A few people, the ones who really study the war, know exactly what those several remarkable feats were. And they still shake their heads in quiet disbelief. Because sometimes, the most impossible things really do happen. And sometimes, one man with a pistol, 4 rounds left, And absolutely nothing left to lose. Wins.